所以呢，我们做的事情除了产品端之外呢，在贩售端我们也开始在推行绿色的生活。根据去年的申报资料，机关、民间、企业、团体还有一般的民众实施绿色采购的成果，统计超过了新台币255亿元，较99年就前一年138亿元有长足的进步。但是我想我们要更往前走，希望说能够不断的进步。这次研讨会我们相信除了可以让这个民间的企业、机关、技师工会等国内单位更了解政府推动绿色生产、绿色消费的政策思维之外也可以互相研讨国外的做法，吸取他国的经验，达到推动绿色采购的经验分享与交流的目的。也希望说这一次各位在这边的研讨会的过程里面，也能够给环保署的绿色采购、绿色生活的各种的作为一些建议。当然，我们也很希望能够向工程会，还有像欧洲商会这地方来，还有欧洲各国来学习欧洲的实施经验。以后我们的双方之间的各种的经贸往来，能够有更多的绿色的成分。在此再恭祝各位，希望各位身体健康，万事如意。谢谢。
Thank you, Dr. Ye. Now it's photo time. Distinguished guests, speakers, please take onto the stage for a group photo, please. Mr. Newboom, Dr. Chen, Dr. Ye, Mr. Laplanche, Mr. Wagner, Ms. Percy, please. Could you take onto the center of the stage? Yeah. All right. Now let us begin our first presentation, Modernization of the EU Public Procurement Policy. I would like to invite Mr. Petr Wagner, Policy Officer, DG Market, European Commission.
My name is Petr Wagner. I work for the European Commission in the Department for Public Procurement, in charge of the international aspects of it. And it's the director that's headed by Mr. Noteboom, who already spoke. My presentation today in the morning would be on the modernization of the EU procurement directives, of the EU procurement framework we have, as been already mentioned. So the idea, this presentation is meant as an introduction into the day. It's a bit larger than green, but the idea would be that you'd have an impression what we're actually trying to do in the EU and how to modernize procurement framework. Yes, I mean, I'm technically quite challenged, I must say, but voilà. So why we did this reform, why we're trying to do the reform in the EU? There were several objectives which are now on the slide. And you will see that when we were trying to make the overhaul of the current directives, we realized that all those nice objectives that we have identified are not always very compatible. So everybody, when we started to do the reform, wanted simple and more flexible procedures. So the contracting authorities can better purchase. People also demanded, lots of NGOs and a number of businesses demanded to include environmental considerations, social considerations, consideration for more modern, innovative procurement, which we call the strategic use. We had to respond to calls of better access to small and medium-sized enterprises. That's the objective number 3. Actually, I could use this thing. Yeah. Everybody wanted, that's typically required by the administration, sound procedures, meaning that there is no corruption. Finally, we wanted to also extend the governance or the way member states actually run their procurement. We wanted to render the procurement framework in the EU more professional. So if you see, the objectives are very nice, but it's not very easy to actually put together strategic use of procurement, green and social objectives, and render the procedure simple. Because the more objectives you add into the legal framework, the less simple the legal framework will be. So I will now take you through what actually came out of it. Well, we had to look, in the first place, we had to look at our international engagements, because just as much Taiwan, the EU is a member of the WTO Government Procurement Agreement. We also have bilateral trade agreements where we have commitments taken. So we needed to, whatever we do internally, we need to be, we need to stay obviously compliant with the GPA. We had also gotten quite inspired by the current or the revised GPA, where we went towards more flexibility in the procedures that are offered by this international framework. The reform has been split in a number of thematic clusters. The first is the flexibilization of the procedures. Then the strategic use of public procurement, which in the EU consists of environment, social aspects, and innovation. Then we focus on reduction of documentation requirements. As my director already said, we had quite moved on with the e-procurement, basically rendering the procurement paperless. We had added some rules on facilitation of access to tenders for small and medium-sized enterprises. We had extended anti-corruption measures, and we had proposed some new rules on governance, meaning oversight of the procurement procedure. So if I look at the first item, the flexibilization of the procedures, what we have currently in the EU is a fairly strict delimitation what type of procedure you can use for what purpose. And obviously the main procedure is open tender, and we allow for some negotiations, but in a very strict, limited cases. When we looked around worldwide, and also in the GPA or in other legal systems, we realized that one could add more negotiation into the procurement procedure, subject to certain safeguards and limitations. Meaning that we now will allow to our contracting authorities to negotiate the quality of the offers, as long as they will not change any basic parameters of the previously published notice. This is typically inspired by the GPA, and is also quite relevant for the theme of today's seminar, because it is more friendly to green public procurement. The idea being that the contracting authority will be able to enter into negotiations, but will have to be professional enough as not to make any mistakes in terms of, discriminating somebody or having any preferences for a particular product or service. So it is a big step for us to allow for increased negotiation in a public procurement procedure. In our view, it's also possible because after a few years of the joint or the common EU procurement system, the professionalization of the contracting authorities went so far that we're actually able to go for that. If we go into the strategic use, as we like to call it now in the EU, in particular for green procurement, the idea would be that the new directives that should come out from the legislative process shall clarify and facilitate the use of green public procurement. Green public procurement is not entirely new in the EU. We've had the possibility to go green for quite some time, but what we've heard a lot from the if you want, the green community, or either the NGOs or also businesses, and most certainly from the contracting authorities that's supposed to follow the directives, they would mention that there was a number of ambiguities or uncertainties in the current directives. And what we're trying to do in the overhaul of the legislation is to remove these. So just to recap, we allow for use of green criteria in technical specifications, in qualification criteria, and in the award. But we've had some quite trouble, in our view, in explaining how to use life cycle costs, how to evaluate production process, because the EU system until now has been obviously directed by the economically most advantageous tender. And for years and years, there has been a discussion between can the green consideration be involved in it or not, and if yes, how? And we've been dancing around it for quite a while, and we believe that now, with what we propose in the new directives, we really help to the member states and their contracting authorities to actually include green procurement without compromising the main objective of procurement, which is to get the best value for taxpayers' money. In particular, as regards green procurement, we had quite a discussion on the usage of labels. Traditionally, the procurement purists would dislike use of labels. They would think that this basically stops competition or can use to discriminations. What we try to do is to facilitate the handling of green procurement via labels while keeping the competition open. So we will now allow for a reference for a particular green label, as long as its content will be linked to subject matter of the procurement. But of course, and that will be always the case in the EU, any other equivalent label will have to be accepted. So we will not restrict procurement to the usage of any one particular label. It is still, obviously, it will still in practice happen, and some labels will be more popular than others, but every tenderer in the EU will still have the possibility to prove its green content, its green, the green content of his tender via a different specification system or labeling system. What I wanted to mention in terms of on green procurement in particular for this seminar is that one should see green procurement as a business opportunity, which is not always the case, in my view. This is not always how people look at green procurement. But if you look at it that there is a growing societal trend worldwide in acquisition of environmental friendly goods and services, it would seem only logical to think that there will be then demand for these kind of goods and products. Most of our spending in the EU on procurement is actually done on regional, local levels, up 70% of the procurement spending. And what they do, the local councils or cities or regions, they take care of a number of large infrastructure projects in education, in street lighting, and these are all goods that have rather huge environmental impact. So we really hope that on one hand, we will, as my director said, on one hand, we will support innovation. On the other hand, we should, have a lesser impact or less negative impact on environment, and at the same time, we're creating business opportunities for new products with high added value. And similarly, just like EU and Taiwan, what we want to produce now is our products with high added value. Just to briefly mention what we did on sustainable procurement at the GPA, which has been recently revised. It has been quite a struggle, to be honest, to actually discuss with the number of parties that are participating in the GPA how to include green or social requirement in procurement. It's been very difficult for those parties to reconcile best value for money and green and social objectives, because naturally in a trade pact like the GPA is, people worry that secondary objectives could be potentially used as a barrier to the market. So what we did, we've managed to agree with all the GPA partners on a fairly detailed work program that should go through all the items of what we call in the GPA sustainable procurement, and that includes these three subheadings: green, social, and innovation. So this work program on basically defining what would be internationally a best practice for green procurement while keeping markets open should start upon the ratification of the GPA. Very briefly on the social aspect, which is the other heading of the strategic use, as we call it in the EU. in a social domain, it's been even harder to reconcile the best volume money principle with the social objectives. Why is that? Because if you decide in procurement that the major issue is that all the issues you want to evaluate in a tender must be linked to the actual subject to the tender, meaning to what you're actually buying, you will understand it's not easy to reconcile with social objectives, because social objectives such as well-being of workers are probably not directly linked to the actual good you purchase. What we have in the EU, we have created something called sheltered workshops, which focus on people with disabilities, and we allow for a certain set aside for these workshops, where contracting authorities may preferentially tender from these, as long as they open the competition to all the sheltered workshops in the EU. So what we do is we somehow give a little preference, but rather trying to actually take away the disadvantage they had, because in a sheltered workshop, if you have handicapped people, you usually have a number of extra staff to take care of them. So normally they would not be competitive with other companies. So what we do, they can tender, but among each other. So we still create a competition among the sheltered workshops in the EU. We have also managed to create a new procedure for purchases of innovative goods and services, where the contracting authority shall cooperate with the company to try to buy something which is not yet on the market. I mean, the challenge here was, again, how to ascertain a free competition and avoid any discrimination, because we wanted to avoid that the contracting authority just picks a company and says, oh yeah, I mean, you will do something new for me, and because it's new, it's not been on the market, I can directly enter into negotiation with you. We did not want that. But at the same time, it's very difficult to do a free and open tender for something which doesn't exist there. And at the same time, we do want to support innovation for taxpayers' money. So we believe, we hope, we have hit it correctly, and we have created a procedure that allows for buying the research of the product and service which has not been on the market. We hope to create a big impact on also an environment by reducing the documentation requirements. Until now, public procurement procedures in the EU obviously required a number of certificates and documents, which is pretty fine, which is pretty normal, because the contracting authorities are unlikely to just do everything on trust. But what we did in the new directives, in the proposed new directives, is that all the tenderers will work on self-declaratory basis, and only the winning bidder will be required to document all the certificates and labels that he had promised and submit the original documents. Of course, failing to do that, he'll be kicked out from the tender. On e-procurement, what we're trying to achieve in the EU is basically a mandatory full electronic availability of all tender documents. We hope to go completely paperless, including submission of tenders within 2 years of the transposition deadline of the directives, which is roughly 2016 by now. And basically by 2016 in the EU, from the notice, from the tender documents and submission of tenders, except the evaluation, everything should be electronic. We had a number of discussions on how to give access to SMEs. I mean, the EU is a big fighter of specific set-asides for the SMEs, for national SMEs. We believe that this is a wrong approach. And so we clearly needed to invent something new, something different. So what we propose to the member states contracting authorities now is to think of dividing certain contracts in lots, of course in a logical manner. And if they don't do that, they should explain why they haven't tendered the particular large contract, why they have not split it in lots. We also hope that what will help to the SMEs is the imposition of a certain turnover cap on their economic and financial standing, where the contracting authorities will be only asked maximum 3 times of the estimated value of the contract. Because by now what happened is that even for contract for 200,000 euros, the contracting authorities had the tendency to require millions and millions of sort of securities and liabilities, and that was not helpful for SMEs. Also, what has worked very well in practice was that some member states already now foresee direct payments to subcontractors. So it's not the contractor that's paying the little SME, but it's the public office that foresees the payment for the subcontractor. So we have seen that practice in some member states, and we are elevating it on the EU level. As regards to sound procedures, we have introduced some safeguards against conflict of interest and other illicit behavior, where now all the interest parties in a tender are obliged to declare any conflicts of interest and take necessary measures. We have strengthened the rules of abnormally low tenders, where the contracting authorities must investigate now why actually a bidder was able to offer such abnormally low price. And we have strengthened the rules for contract modification after award, which used to be a problem in the EU, particularly some member states, where extra works were added after the signature, after the award. And as regards governance in the EU, the obligation to ensure correct application of the directive stays with member states, with the individual member states. So we are proposing some guidelines how to monitor some of the structural problems one may encounter in procurement. We also want to reinforce the mutual assistance we have within the EU and within the EU and among the member states by creating something called IMI, it's Internal Market Information System, and where we should try to resolve certain issues on an amicable manner. And that's it for me today. Thank you.
Let's welcome Ms. Eva Percy, Head of the Sustainable Development Unit, City of Vienna. Let's welcome her.
Thank you also for inviting me here, and I would like to start my session with a short video. I think we say words say more, pictures say more than words, and I ask you please to start the video now because I'm not good at technical stuff.
4-year-old Max is tucking into his lunch. 40% of the food served at this Vienna kindergarten is organically grown, and according to Max, it tastes good. This is not just a politically correct whim by the Austrian local authority. It's part of a carefully planned strategy to buy environment-friendly products wherever it can. Not just in kindergartens and schools, but hospitals too. A third of the food served in Vienna's hospitals is organic, without chemicals or additives.
Wir haben durch die Produktion der biologischen Lebensmittel eine Reduktion des CO2-Ausstoßes und natürlich auch eine vollkommene Reduktion der Hormonbeigaben bei den Lebensmitteln. Und das ist natürlich für die Gesundheit sehr förderlich.
Public authorities have huge purchasing power. If all over Europe public canteens went organic, it's calculated that pollution of soil and water would be reduced by the equivalent to that created by a city the size of Berlin. This is just one example of green spending making a difference, which is why the European Commission is trying to encourage all public administrations to adopt a green buying policy.
Every year, public authorities at all levels in the European Union spend 1,000 billion euros to purchase things they need for the day-to-day activities. And this, with another figure, represents around 14% of the European Union's GDP. So this can have an enormous impact on the environment if you buy green.
Vienna may be an historic city, but it also has an eye to the future. Around a third of public authorities in Europe have launched a green purchasing program, but Vienna is one of the most advanced. And with a huge budget of 5 billion euros a year to spend on goods and services, it's realizing the power that gives to improve the environment.
Das ist an und für sich ganz logisch, dass